Woo! Okay, so home inspections, they're essential for the home buying process, and they can be very, very frustrating. Some inspections can make the deal, some of them can destroy the deal. That's what we're here talking about. It can be kind of fun, kind of frustrating. It is what it is, I guess. How are
Answer.
y'all?
I'm good. I'm great. What about yourselves?
Yeah,
I'm
doing well,
doing well. I'm a little overloaded just thinking about these red flags.
right?
I guess you have to have a couple of red flags before you throw up a white flag and move on. But we've done that. We've had to get out of a property that we were buying in the inspection period just because of the inspection. So happens. So we're going to talk today a little bit about those wonderful home inspections that are a necessity. Not only we're going to talk about what they are, but why you want them and some of the red flags to look out for. So, Carrie, tell us a little bit about what a home inspection is in the most general form.
So, a home inspection is essentially going to be a limited visual survey and basic evaluation of all the different systems and components in the house. So, the inspector is going to look at things like the roof, they're going to look at the foundation, they're going to test the oven, the cooktop, they're going to test the AC and the heater. They're just going to kind of go through, test things, look at things, and see if they find something that looks off.
Exactly. And you hit the nail on the head when you said it's a limited visual survey and basic performance evaluation. That's what the state of Texas wants everybody to understand. You are not putting that house up on some exam table. You're not doing a colonoscopy on it. You're not going all through and looking at everything. It's basically what you can see, but not only what you could see or I could see, but what a trained eye could see. And they're not required to use any kind of specialized equipment to perform their home inspection, but you're going to see a lot of inspectors who are going to bring extra little tools and stuff. But it's not one of those comprehensive investigations. You're not going to, go under the hood for say, because we're not cutting into any walls. We're not digging under the foundation. It's basically what a trained eye is going to be looking for in that probe to determine, are there issues? Are there not issues? So it's kind of, some people go, well, I'm pretty smart. Well, I don't think you're that smart. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, we all are like that. When it comes to an inspection, when a seller wants to list their home, this is a question I have for you, Robbie, if you can answer. What is the time period that a seller has to disclose in an inspection?
Anytime a seller is in receipt of additional information that has been provided to them, either through their own home inspection or through maybe one that a buyer does and the contract falls out, they then have to go and amend their seller's disclosure notices and include everything that they've been put on notice about. And there's a lot of things. You don't have to do that. Let's say Carrie and I are doing a deal. Necessarily like to see that inspection. Let's say she sends it to us. I don't have to go through with my client and make sure that my client rediscloses everything on that inspection report. But Nelson, if you decided not to purchase and you left the transaction and we had to start again, then yes, we would have to take a pause and redisclose everything. And some people like to see those inspection reports, and it depends on the seller's disclosure notices that the buyer actually chooses to use, because the Texas Real Estate Commission seller's disclosure notice does not require you to provide copies of previous inspections, but the Texas Realtor one does. So there's a little bit of difference there too.
Yeah, because over the weekend I ran into something similar in a situation where the sellers had disclosed on the Texas Realtors seller's disclosure that they had an inspection done a year prior. But as I'm looking through the files, right, I want to see if that inspection was listed, but unfortunately it wasn't. And that's something that,
that's something you have to ask for typically, and you get that information. Yeah. But it really, when you're selling a house, it really does depend on what the seller chooses for a seller's disclosure notice. And it kind of backs up even really then and keeping it updated with the proper information.
Now, I had a question for Carrie since you spoke about the inspections. If you're showing listings to your clients, would you, vocalize some things that you see that might, alert your clients that could potentially show up in an inspection later, or would you keep that to yourself?
If I saw something that was materially important about the property, like, say, for example, a giant crack in a wall, I would definitely point that out and say, hey, there's a crack in this wall. Let's get an inspector out to dig into it a little bit more. I mean, obviously, I don't have any, I'm not an inspector. I don't have the ability to inspect just by virtue of my real estate license. But at the same time, if I see something that looks off, I'm definitely going to tell my client to have it checked out by a professional inspector.
Definitely. I mean,
Absolutely.
we see it so often every time we go through, and we eventually see
Yeah.
it later. So our eye, over repetition, just picks up on these little things. I think it was last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, I was showing a house, and everything was so perfect. The home was just beautiful everywhere, inside and out, until I was leaving. And as I'm leaving, I look at the garage, the exterior of the garage, and it's laid in brick. And I see a crack that had been refilled with the same color brick. And I didn't see it when I was walking in at the time of day, but when I was leaving, I saw a reflection. And I was like, what is that little glimmer? And it was the shine of the sealant that they put. And the brick crack went all the way up to the apex of the pitch of the roof, and that to me is a big no to have brick crack in half and then be sealed afterwards. That's yikes.
Yeah, that's something you definitely want to ask an inspector about. I constantly, point out and say, don't know what that is, but that like makes me tingle. So we need to make sure we ask the inspector about that. And we typically kind of take notes when we're, going through.
Yeah, definitely. What are some red flags that you guys see constantly? Very similar. What would you name, or let's put it this way, what would you say a red flag to you would be, Carrie?
You mean like a specific red flag?
Yeah, specific red flag.
I mean, any kind of like major cracks in walls and floors and exteriors, like you were just talking about, that patched brick would be a clue to me to want to have an inspector come in and do a little bit more research. Anything that indicates there may have been water damage in the house. Again, I like to have an inspector come in and kind of dig into that a little bit more. But I mean, there are so many different things. And, I always have that inspector come in and give me a second opinion, because there are a lot of things that I see that I may think are cause for alarm, and they don't mean anything at all. That's when it's also good to have an inspector come in and say, oh, that's what this is. That's why it might be happening. And, it might not be a huge deal.
When you said water damage, it made me giggle, because I remember when my parents bought here in Austin, the previous sellers had a big grandfather clock in front of a wall that couldn't really be moved when they walked through. And it was in a weird spot to put a grandfather clock. It was in the bathroom. So we didn't think of it, but they said it was their mother's heirloom, so they wanted to be close. I don't know. It was just probably some
Limited
BS.
to bathe with their mother's heirloom.
Yeah, it was just probably some BS. But once the contract gets accepted and the inspection comes in, it's because they were hiding a broken pipe behind that grandfather clock that led to the master shower or the primary shower. And I'm like, wow, that is, I mean, you can't move a grandfather clock because it's very stable. All the things are like gears are perfectly aligned, so you never really move it. So that was what they were saying. Oh, let's not move it. It's blah blah blah. And I'm just like, that's that can probably be a big sign.
Wow, that's definitely a red flag.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we encourage buyers to have each property inspected that they're going under contract on by a licensed inspector during that option period. And we also want to make sure that everybody knows that it is up to the individual buyers to choose their inspector. Don't necessarily listen to what your agent says as far as the inspectors that they recommend, but it is your report and it is your information, and you have to feel confident with it. So make sure it's somebody that you know, like, and at least trust from reading the reviews or looking at their website, whatever it is. And you are also able to accompany an inspector during that inspection. I, as well as many other agents, encourage you to show up towards the end of the inspection and let the inspector kind of run around, do everything. Because what I have seen with clients who do show up for the entire inspection time is that the inspector is so busy talking to the client and describing what he's seeing that he misses or she misses a couple of things. So we want to make sure they have ample time to do their job and then they'll spend ample time with you explaining everything that they found.
Yeah.
But Carrie nailed it on the head earlier. Real estate license are not inspectors by the virtue of their real estate license. I think that was even her wording. And that we don't possess any kind of special skills, knowledge, or expertise regarding inspections or those repairs. And we can tell you what we've seen in certain areas, but you always need to depend on those inspectors. Big time.
Here's something you mentioned when you were talking about the inspection, coming at towards the end. It's just, you get in the way, and you don't want to do that to yourself, because those little things could end up being a lot larger later, those little misses, and that might be problematic. So it's just best to get out of the way if you can. And it's so much nicer to just get the recap afterwards. Just, all right, touch me up on, what happened, right? And that's their job. They do it. They do a good job at it, and they'll let you know in layman's terms what's happening or what needs to be addressed. So
yeah, their main job is to find problems with the houses. And I've heard Carrie tell clients in the past, I've been sitting there watching her and listening to her, and she goes, everybody needs advocates when they're buying a home, and I'm your advocate for the contract and finding the home, but you've got to have somebody inspect that home.
Would you highly recommend a new construction to hire an inspector towards the end?
Every single time.
Yes.
Every single time.
Very crucial for that, indeed. Yep.
Yeah, because you're human. I'm human. The guys and gals working on the houses to be built are human, and things are missed. And those inspectors, well, I've heard some things come out of your mouth about the questionable
ethics
ways. Yeah, I was trying to avoid that word. The ethics of those inspectors. So, we have to, it is nice. And I've had 5 and 6 hour inspections on new construction, and they don't find everything, but they can definitely come in and say, oh, this was missed. And, we've seen stuff where they've had, these wonderful little plugs, and it looks like everything's going, but then the wire isn't connected to the plug. So there's no power there. Yeah. So it's important to, when you're building, to get an independent third-party inspector who's done it in the past. You're gonna have to let the builder know about it, but the builder and their rep is not your client's advocate. As nice as they are and they want to be, they just aren't.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt. Most of the builders I have worked with, they would not mind you. They would recommend it too. So it's just, but you'll find some that won't. They don't want you to. That's a red flag to me. It's like, oh, hey, right, what's this all about? I've been doing my due diligence and going as often as I can to inspect your home and to do what I can to see what's going on, but I'm not a trained inspector. I don't have a license for this. I cannot. That's why you have to hire one at the end of everything to make sure everything is A-okay.
But you've been great on catching things so far in those bills.
Yeah, I love finding them. It's like if I had a nickel every time.
Right? Yeah.
There's always something new.
Absolutely. And so there's 2 different kinds of inspections that we're going to really hammer today, talking about those independent third-party inspections, whether you're doing a new construction or you're doing a resale construction of an existing home. But builders, when they are building a home for you, they go through and have several different phase inspections is basically what they're called. And those phase inspections are different than a third-party inspection. So Nelson, can you tell us a little bit more about the phase inspections that happen during the process of a new build?
So phase inspections will be mainly done throughout the lifetime of the build. So for every phase that the builder has, there usually be an inspection that needs to be done prior to moving on to the next phase. In this sense, one of them will always be runoff, where water is running before they pour the foundation, because they're not going to pour a foundation where the water is going to essentially wipe away that foundation, right? Water is just going to, whoop, there it goes. So that needs to be inspected before a foundation gets poured to make sure the foundation will be okay during any torrential downpours that may happen here in Texas. You never know, right? So they'll do a phase there and they'll move on to the next part of the build, which may include, framing. And once framing gets done, there needs to be an inspection. Electrical comes up, there needs to be inspection. There's inspections throughout the entire lifetime of a build that is required by the county for the builder to do. But you should also be hiring your third-party inspector to do one as well at the end, because like Robbie said, we're all human. Everyone from writing the contract to building to inspecting and so forth, we're all human and we can miss things. So
Absolutely.
I have counted a few things that I have seen that have been missed at these builds, but if I voice my opinion early enough, it can get seen and fixed prior to them continuing on down the line where it becomes irreparable later, or they don't want to fix it because it's going to cost more money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Carrie, essentially, what does an inspector do? One of those third-party inspectors. We've seen them. We've gotten information about them. A buyer's going to be sitting here calling, and they're expected to pay like $350 to $500. What are they going to do for that money?
So that inspector is going to go through, find problems, and communicate them to the party that has hired them. That is their only job that they do. They're actually not allowed to fix any of the problems that they find. So they're just looking for problems and communicating them.
Yeah, that's just a huge thing right there, is talking about that they're not allowed to fix them. So they're not going to be sitting there working on a list and then hit you up and say, "Hey, Nelson, tell your client I can fix these for $500." They're not allowed to do that. Yeah. And what a lot of people don't know is in Texas, the Texas Real Estate Commission just standardized the inspection report. So it's a completely different report than some of us are used to. So you're going to have to take a gander and really kind of get into that. But it's going to create an even playing field so that everybody understands what they're seeing in that report.
Mm-hmm.
And which is going to be nice.
Yeah, those inspection reports can be overwhelming. They can be 28 pages long to over hundreds of pages long. There's a lot of stuff in it.
Yeah.
I mean, how many books have I read in my lifetime? I don't know, right? But it's an inspection report, something I want to read. Like, it's going to get read from beginning to end because it's something that you're investing in. You have to read it as long as it may be, but it's better to know what is going on than not knowing, right? Because you're signing something for that later.
So, Nelson, what's a red flag to you in general?
Man, anything red flag to me it can come down to the other agent not, wanting to touch up on something to me, specifically if I ask multiple times. That's one red flag. But a big red flag in an inspection to me, man, it's water. Water is scary because if there's a slab leak, I've learned from insurance that most insurances won't cover a slab leak repair. You need to pay for that. And that is a big expense. That's a lot of money. And especially with the older homes, you got to do sometimes some hydrostatic testing to be able to see what's going on. And that's a big expense, especially if the house is from, circa 1900s, right? Then that's an expense. And that's something I don't want to touch personally if it was my own home. And I would really, vocalize myself to my clients about that kind of stuff.
Right.
Water is scary. I mean, it can do all sorts of damage. You're supposed to water your foundation so that it's okay during the hot summer months, but then too much water can be really bad. You never know if there's a pipe broken or some roots from the trees growing underground and it disturbs the pipe. It's just a lot. And a little bit of water, can crack a rock in half over time. And I'm sure it can do the same to a foundation.
Absolutely. So we're all in agreement that basically red flags are going to be the deal breakers, the things that we have to go deeper and deeper and we can't get a good handle on, because everybody's clients have a little different idea of what's a deal breaker. Some people can be like freaking out about the littlest things and skip the big things. And then some people are just like all about just the big things.
Yeah.
And of course, we've got four big things in Texas, one being foundation, the other one being the roof, the HVAC, because HVAC can be expensive just to get somebody out there, right?
Yeah.
Sure
Especially
can.
the maintenance on them too. If you're trying to, it's not within the life, it's within the lifespan, but to maintain it, to get someone to fix it up because you've neglected it or the previous owners have neglected it, it's an expense.
Yeah, the deferred maintenance is really kind of a huge, huge category.
Yeah.
So, Carrie, walk us through foundations. And, before we even jump in there, everybody knows, hopefully, everybody understands that does not matter in where you are in Texas, there are foundation issues in Texas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of foundation problems in Texas. So always something to look for if you're buying in Texas. Warning signs for foundation issues can be things like we talked about earlier, cracks in walls, uneven flooring. I see this one a lot. Windows and doors that don't shut properly. It means that the house is shifted. Gaps like we were talking about earlier in brick or repairs with the brickwork. Another thing to look for is misaligned like front steps or patio steps. If they don't quite line up with the house, or maybe they have some cracks in them. Cracks in driveways is another thing to look at. And a lot of times, if you or your home inspector sees these things, you may want to have a specialized foundation inspection done to really understand the extent of the damage. Is it something that needs to be repaired? Is it something that can be, let to exist? And then, of course, you can go through and kind of get a quote. But having a bad foundation can lead to things like structural problems. Like Nelson was talking about, it can lead to plumbing problems like a slab leak. Of course, it does also lead to cosmetic issues and just lowered resale price in general.
Back in the 90s, Venetian plaster and stuff on the walls was really kind of making it big. It seemed like the houses that had the foundation issues and the cracks in the walls are the ones that had Venetian plaster on them, that where they kind of did the plastering and then the painting on there to make it look really cool and very Roman.
Yeah, but you can see those cracks.
Yeah, and then we would find out that they were using that to cover up some major structural issues, and it was like, oh wow, big time.
Yeah.
Wow.
It could happen. It can cause a lot of damage too. Like even a bad foundation could put strain on your ceiling, your roof, and that can cause problems with the high-speed winds or water, the rain that gets in here, because the shingles can easily just, misalign. It's not even anymore, and now you got water coming in from one side, and now you got water damage in your attic that's coming down to your roof. So there's a lot of problems with the foundation, but it's always better to just keep an eye on alert those things. Don't get distracted by the beauty of the furniture that's inside and all of that paint color, because I know it can happen. I always say it. We're not here to look at the furniture. You're not buying the furniture. You are buying the house. 3 pair of eyes are a lot better than 1 pair of eyes. If y'all could just help me out and look, and then call me if you see something and we can talk about it. But don't get distracted by the beautiful red chair in the back.
Right.
We can go to Haverty's later and go find one. Like, it's okay.
Haverty's, my store there. Yeah. Nelson, you really hit the nail on the hammer when you were talking about water, because we're going to be talking about water really, a lot today. And even with somebody's roof, we have hail all across Texas. We've got it from San Antonio to Dallas, Fort Worth, far widespread. And there's just tons of hail damaged roofs out there, whether the homeowner said, hey, it's not enough, I can't notice anything. The guy who came out and looked said we didn't really have any kind of damage, to, oh yeah, the roof's got to be replaced because there is a lot of damage. A lot of times the seller doesn't even know. And a lot of times we have sellers who didn't want to be bothered at the time to go file an insurance claim and take care of the roof repairs or anything like that. But it is really, really important to keep the water out of your home from the foundation all the way up to the roof. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of things that can cause damage to a roof, and it cause it to leak and then rot and just all different other aspects from a leaky roof. Yeah. And one of the great ways that you can find a lot of roof repairs that may not have been disclosed that they got paid for it, but they didn't really do it, is off of something called a clue report. And a clue report is something that you can get from your insurance agent. And during an option period, every buyer should be talking to their insurance person. And they should be getting a copy of the Comprehensive Loss Underwriting Exchange Report, or what we call a clue report. And they take the buyer and the property and they mesh them together. And they look and say, okay, this property is insurable for this buyer, but then here are all the claims that have been made on this house. Because you could have somebody who's filed, an individual who's filed a whole lot of claims and have a house that's going to have a lot of problems. And they say, we can't get you insurance for this house because the buyer doesn't approve for that insurance, even though it's insurable. So that report will also show you, and see, I guess what people don't realize is we have credit scores for, our financial world, but in the insurance world, the clue report is an insurable credit score.
Yeah.
But that report will show you if there's been any kind of insurance claims that have been paid out on a property. And then you can compare that information to a seller's disclosure report and know whether they fixed the roof or not.
Yeah. Good research didn't hurt anyone.
No, and buyers need to know that they can do that and get that information.
Yeah.
Because it's keeping that water out that's important. And Carrie, what kind of water damage is out there?
Oh gosh, water can just completely wreak havoc on a house. It doesn't matter if it comes from a leaking appliance, that can happen, roof damage like we just talked about, or anything else. A big storm can drive water into a house. But it can cause major stuff, like we're talking mold inside walls. If you have a leaking roof and water that's been intruding into walls for really any amount of time in Texas, because it's very humid here, you can, easily get a mold issue in a house. Water is also going to cause foundation issues, obviously, and especially when freezing weather occurs. Water that's been pooling inside a foundation, if we have another big winter storm like we've had before, that water can freeze and it can break a lot of things.
Yeah, we're going to see a bunch of items on those clue reports and other stuff from the isopocalypse from 2021, where there's going to be a whole lot of things that are, walls were torn out and, freezing water damage was corrected all day long. We're going to see a whole lot of those still coming through on some of those reports. But Nelson, you really hit something earlier, and we were out looking at properties a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about the gradings of the yard. So can you talk a little bit and educate everybody a little bit on how important the grade is on the outside lot surrounding a house?
Yeah. So grade is very important, and it gets, it's determined naturally over time with rain, shiftment of the earth, fault lines, things like that. When you come to building on a house, on a foundation, that grade needs to be as solid as possible without being altered by man, because if it is, it's not going to hold its current foundation if you're not building pier and beam all the way down 50 feet, right? Now, if you're just going to pour a slab on top, it can have consequences. And these grades, naturally, when they do the rough run, they should be doing multiple testings with rough runoff, which could be 2 or 3. So they'll have one that is just kind of like a preemptive rough one just to see where it goes, and then they'll do another one midway, and then a final one at the end before they lay grass to see where the water settles most. But if you have a steep pitch in your backyard and your neighbors in the back might be living there on a lower part of the grade, they're going to get a lot of the water that is running off from the other neighbors, and that can be problematic to their foundation if it's not addressed correctly, right? You kind of want to brace yourself for possibilities of hard runoff coming from your neighbor in the backyard, and you might want to build some I call them French drains because that's exactly what they are. Or maybe channel the water elsewhere to avoid hitting your foundation or getting too much onto one side, maybe disperse it equally. And it's nothing that you need to pay anyone to do. It's something you can do by yourself. Very easy. It's a fun project. Just make sure you don't hit any sprinklers that they may be installed, because you're going to break a pipe and that'll be an expense. But taking care of that water, and as being a new purchaser at a new build, your due diligence is to read that warranty report that the builder is going to give you, because if you don't do what they recommend and what's stated in there, you're voiding your warranty on that home. So you need to make sure you read it and you do what it states, whether it says planting shrubbery around the foundation that can absorb some of the water, or to be able to water your foundation monthly during the summer months is very important, because that can all be problematic later in the future.
Yeah, foundation plants were in design thrown in around foundations to keep you watering your foundation, to keep that ground at least a little moist, not all the time, but what you're trying to avoid is the big cracks that are happening in the ground. And if you don't have plants around there going, hey guys, we need water, you're not going to actually keep that and hopefully avoid some big cracks and movement in the ground.
Yeah.
And, that's what, I see a lot of houses across Texas, especially San Antonio area, where they've taken out all the foundation plants. And you can just see the edge of the foundation, and it's like, oh my gosh, that needs some, you've got to be watering that. Grass isn't enough to be able to judge whether you're getting enough water around that.
Yeah. And it's bad because say you do have, it's where it's flat and there's water, because just your grade is just at a flat grade, right? You need to have that water, because sometimes the grade will help with watering foundation. For example, the neighbor that has a steep pitch in the back and the grade is running off into their foundation, that could help. But it could also cause problems with stagnant water that's sitting there, and that can be problematic to a foundation. So you want to kind of divert it and distribute it equally if you can around your home. And that's why I recommend just looking and seeing and paying attention to those little cues, because that can be really big. And I've seen it in one neighborhood where I saw it's actually a pretty steep decline into the neighbor's backyard. And I kind of want to find out who they are so they can talk to each other and maybe like work something out where they can channel out some water different directions, because they're going to have some problems in the future. And if it's not addressed early on, it's going to be problematic really bad.
And nobody likes mosquitoes, and that's what comes from those, sitting water.
Just stagnant, just chilling there.
A lot of areas of Texas has that black dirt and clay and stuff, and some have sand, and some's got nice, really good soil, but it's not everywhere.
I call it. It's actually called, according to the agricultural. This PDF has not been updated since the 50s. It's called Black Houston soil. That's what it's called, and it's predominantly on the east side of I-35, and it's just
in the Central Texas area.
In the Central Texas, and all that's the name is just really, it's just clay. It tells you like the first few inches is maybe dirt, topsoil, and then it's 24 inches of clay, and then you hit maybe some bedrock a little bit, and then more clay underneath that. So it's like, this report hasn't been updated, but I think because it hasn't changed much, and it's free online, it's at a library, you can go check it out and download it off Texas A&M's website.
There's areas in like Dallas, Fort Worth, and Arlington and stuff that have that same dirt. And it's funny because back, if you like history at all, those were where the cotton farms were.
Yeah.
And they because cotton loves that kind of dirt and stuff. So it's always been kind of crazy.
Very easy to maintain with water, and it's very easy to also plant these, just be able to dig a hole and plant, continue on down the road. I don't know how they do it in like in farmland, but to me, it would seem a lot easier to dig a hole where there's clay, rather than limestone. It's going to be
plow and throw some plants in, cover it up. Yeah.
Now
John Deere's got machines that will dig a hole, drop a plant, and cover it up for you. And you can do like, I don't remember how many thousand in a minute now. It's really kind of cool.
I saw something the other day. It was just an old device, probably from the early 1900s, and it's steel. It looks like a hoe essentially, but it's being pulled by a tractor or a horse. And what it does is they were cutting up, dicing. It's a potato planter, and they would just chop up some potatoes. And as the tractor pulls the device, there's some gears that rotate a table in front of it, and they're throwing these pieces of chopped potato in there. And it's dropping underneath while a hoe is creating the trench, making a hole and planting it, and then also covering it right after. And it was pretty cool watching because that they said it was like from the 1908 time, and I was like, wow, this is something that was from back then, and now it's making a comeback in technology, a lot more modern and advanced than it, like he's just said with John Deere. So
Nelson, you could be a potato farmer.
I can eat potatoes all day long.
Hey, that might not be bad because during the Great Depression, potatoes were a big thing. So I guess they loved the fact that they could just cut up a potato and plant it and it grow.
Yeah, and they get 4 or 5 more in a couple months.
Carrie, there's maybe you need to add some potatoes to your garden back there.
Maybe so.
I'll come get your potatoes.
Cool.
And hopefully you'll have an electrified crop. But when it comes to electricity and electricians, which ones are the best ones to call?
Always, y'all, always consult a licensed electrician when you're having electrical repairs done.
And if you can find a master electrician, that's even better.
Yes.
Yeah. They find a lot of issues, and the biggest one seems to be with the HVAC and the size of the breaker that's put in. So Carrie, walk us through a little bit about working with electrical issues with a home inspection.
Yeah, so one of the big things that a home inspector is going to look for when they come through and do the inspection is they're going to open up the circuit breaker box and they're going to check those circuit breakers, because there are a lot of outdated circuit breakers that are still out there that have been, proven to not function the way that they're supposed to. And inspectors are aware of which brands and which makes those are. And so that's one of the first things they'll be able to identify is if there are any issues going on with the circuit breakers in the house. Another thing that they're going to look at as far as electricity goes is that sometimes aluminum wiring can exist in a lot of homes. If it does, it doesn't necessarily have to be rewired. There are safety measures that can be taken to make aluminum wiring safe, but they have to be the right safety measures. And again, that's something that you want to talk to the licensed master electrician to figure out for you.
What about building codes? Are you have you seen that the cities and municipalities, Central Texas, South Texas, are keeping up within a couple of years of the building codes and the changes?
Yeah, so that's something I've seen actually come up a lot. Something will have been built perfectly and up to code, 5 or 10 years ago, and then an inspector will come in and identify, certain things that are no longer up to code. And again, that's going to be an issue that an inspector is going to identify and that a seller probably isn't aware of because, their home's been built up to code. And, most people are not going to check the building code as it's updated and cross-reference how their house is built. So that's another really good reason that it's good to have an inspector come in and just, check things against the way building codes are running currently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because one thing you don't want to have is electrical fire.
Correct.
And what you will see is a lot of people will throw in wires or change out breakers or do stuff. Mm-hmm. And, some of those HVAC companies put in different breakers for their units other than what is basically suggested by the home inspector. And if that turns out to be the case, if you've had a different size breaker put in for that HVAC, save that paperwork as a seller, because the buyer's going to want to see if the inspector flags it and says, hey, this has got the wrong size breaker. Why did that HVAC company do that? Because sometimes they have specific reasons.
Yeah,
that's true.
When you guys talk about electricity, something I see in the future is being those power for solar power. Like, I guess you can say, like, for example, just the extra battery in your garage that's connected to a certain dedicated line. I feel like those in the future are going to be changing, and it's going to be wise to keep an eye on that because technology right now, this is fairly new. It's still new to us, and it's making a big comeback here, or a big, grand opening, I guess you can say, here in Austin, Texas, right, with Tesla here. We're going to start seeing a lot more houses trying to adapt to that kind of lifestyle. And I see in the future that we're going to have problems with, older homes having these batteries installed and not being able to handle the load, right? And you might have newer homes that have it right at the moment, but like you said, in 5 years, they might needs some maintenance or some updates because the technology has changed and it changes pretty fast.
Yeah. Now, I'm old school, but find me a house with a generator all day long in addition instead of, solar panels, and I'm good because hey, those natural gas generators saved a bunch of people's booties in 2021, and I have a feeling that they're going to again in the future very
Yeah,
quickly. I
definitely.
keep seeing more and more on Facebook where these big trucks are saving these Teslas on the side of the road because they've got a generator. It's like I'm usually delivering gas, but I'm charging one of those electrical cars now. So it's kind of crazy.
Have y'all run into any of the homes that have the new Tesla shingle, solar powered shingles, I guess you can say?
I
Those-
haven't. I've
yeah.
seen them for years. Have you seen them in
I haven't
person?
seen them. I want to see them in person. I want to find a house that has it because it's totally cool to see how that works. I know Easton Park down on the East Austin side, southeast side. There's going to be a specific set of Easton Park that is going to be having that as an option that you can pay for. So it's going to be pretty cool to see those houses because you can't really tell. They just look like normal shingles. And it's just pretty dope to see that it doesn't have the old school, 6-inch off your ceiling kind of solar panel there. No, it's just integrated into the shingle to collect as much sunlight as possible.
Yeah, which I think is great and it's wonderful until you got it covered with what? Snow,
Yeah.
ice,
Or do a comparable with it.
right?
Man.
So, what about plumbing issues? Have y'all seen a lot of plumbing issues across Central, South Texas, North Texas? I mean,
Yep.
we
Everywhere.
we always run into some of that deferred maintenance, the leaky faucets or stuff like that. But what about any low water pressure issues or
Yeah, there's
anything like that?
all sorts of plumbing problems. Like, I mean, over time, hard water develops hard minerals into these pipelines, and they can cause problems. Where you get low pressure, they can burst pipes. Too much pressure. We recently had a scare where here at the house, there's just like we got a notice from the water company that our water has spiked up, and we didn't know what it was, and that we know there's a leak somewhere because if it goes from norm to exceeding the normal that by like 5, then yes, that's a huge leak somewhere. And trying to find that leak was impossible because we didn't notice anything in the house. No leak, no, less pressure, I guess you can say. But then we're worried now it's a slab leak somewhere, maybe underground that's connected to a sprinkler line or some other line. And it just happened to be that a root from a tree just, kind of disrupted a pipe outside, and that was causing a major leak by the tree. And that is a problem because that's a huge expense. I mean, after seeing the water bill go up, now you start panicking because now you want to get a plumber, master certified plumber out here as soon as possible to do these testings, because the longer you wait, the more chance there might be something, a leak under the foundation. Your house could possibly sink in one side. You start thinking the worst. So you call for a rush, fee, and they come out here and they fix it, and they found it really quickly. But yeah, I mean, that's an expense I had to pay out of pocket because it's not something that's going to be covered by my home insurance. And there's all other sorts of plumbing problems, right? You got old piping from the 1900s, which now is not to code anymore today, right? We use different type of piping, and it's changed many times throughout our lifetime and generations before. So there's always going to be piping problems and plumbing problems.
Yeah, Moen actually has a Flow Smart water monitor system and shut off that you ought to check out. It's on Amazon. I can send you. They've got it for 3/4 inch, 1 inch, and 1 1/4 inch, and it basically detects and does leak testing all the time. And you can track tons of different stuff with this actual box, and it's if I remember right, it's like around $200.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they have it on Amazon. It's by Moen, so that may be something you want to check out because it has an app and stuff, and it's really good about detecting some of those water leak stuff.
Yeah, $200 is not bad compared to $2,200.
Right. Right. And it's really kind of worth it because it'll start tracking if you've got a whole lot more water going through. It will kind of, set you up and let you know ahead of time when it's actually starting to happen. And you can go, oh, okay, what's up with that? So that's something that's really kind of good to check out. I know some realtors will have actually given those in the past.
Yeah. And it's also good to know and educate yourself as a homeowner. I know people who don't even know where their water valve shutoff is or their
Right.
gas shutoff valve is. Like those are very important to know. And it's very good if you see a leak like what we did. The first thing I did is I went to go shut the main water off. Even though we didn't have water for a whole day, that's fine. But I prefer that than anything else causing more problems, because for the amount of water that was there, for it to dry up would have taken a couple weeks in the Texas heat. You know, that's how much water there was just being
Oh,
pushed out
wow.
hourly. So you want to make sure that you know where that master line is or that main water line is so you can turn it off, right? Anything
Yeah.
problems like that.
Sometimes that your nose can kind of lead you in that direction because it'll create a moldy smell in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And sediment buildup and rust is a big thing that we have to look out for, and that can cause some issues with some of our plumbing as well. One of the big things is your water heater. If you don't have a tankless, is draining it out. At least once a year. I was like, oh my gosh, turn the water off and drain it. Really, it helps remove some of that sediment and stuff.
Yep.
But
It's just there.
yeah. What about high water pressure? Are there valves that they make? Have y'all heard?
Yeah,
Carrie?
so high water pressure is an issue all around Central Texas, but I know there are a lot of neighborhoods, especially in South Austin, that have issues with high water pressure. And yes, there is a pressure reducing valve that is installed between the water meter and the house near the curb. And a lot of houses in the neighborhoods have them installed just as something that the builder did when they built the houses. An important thing to know, though, is that those valves are only made to last about 10 years. So they need to be replaced every decade or so. Fortunately, it's a fairly easy fix. But, if you do identify a high water pressure issue in a house, that's something to look at doing.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things so far that we've covered that could be red flags in a home inspection. And a lot of it's going to depend on what your buyer or what you as the buyer are thinking is important. Based on your history, you may be a plumber, so you can take care of these things and they're easy. Or you may, have a cousin or uncle who's an electrician, so those things aren't any big deal. But these are some of the red flags that we have found in home inspections, and we definitely want you to hang around for part 2 and really kind of jump in and talk more about some of those red flags that we see in home inspections, because these are the things that can make and break your real estate transaction. And we know how hard it is to find a home, and then you go, okay, I've done the majority of it, now I have to hear all of the bad stuff. But it's good to be an informed buyer and have as much information to try and predict your experience with this house. So thanks for joining us today. Y'all have any last little parting thoughts for everybody?
If you like what you heard and you want to see more, like and subscribe, right?
Like and subscribe, of course. I love it. You got it. So yeah, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. And we look forward to seeing you again.
Cheerio.
Yeah, it's been fun, y'all. Thanks.
It has. Y'all are so smart. I feel smarter every time I'm around y'all.
Thank you. I'll see you next week.